Hi there, Rebea Corcino here from Control Intelligence. Today, I want to show you how to use financial functions inside Microsoft Excel. In this session, we are going to learn more about the important functions which are used in financial modeling, and that most of these functions play a key role in understanding any models that you make. We will be tackling about 5 different functions in the financial category, and these are specifically the future value function, the FV schedule function, the present value function, the net present value function, and the X and PV function.
As we can see, Microsoft Excel is the most important tool for investment bankers and financial analysts. They would spend 70% of the time in preparing Excel models, formulating assumptions, valuations, calculations like graphs, and so on and so forth. Though there are more than 50 plus financial functions inside the Microsoft Excel, we are only going to tackle about 5 important functions in the financial category. So without much, we're going to have a look at different functions one by one. And we'll start first with the future value function. So how does the future value function work? Well, if you want to find the future value of a particular investment, which has constant interest rates and periodic payments used, we will need the future value formula. So first, we would type in the equal sign, following the FV, then just open the parentheses, and we will see the rate and PER, PMT, PV, and the type. The rate basically refers to the interest rate or the period. The NPER is the number of periods. The PMT is the payment period. The PV is the present value. And lastly, the type is basically when the payment is made. And if nothing is mentioned, then it is assumed that the payment has already been made at the end of the period. So now let me give you a short example so you can have a wider idea about this financial function. So let us say that the rate of interest here is 20%, the NPR around 5, the PMT around 3, the PV around negative 150, and the type would be 0. So all we have to do is drag each of these values according to its label inside the FV formula function. So we have equal sign FV, open parenthesis. First we drag in the rate, then comma, the NPR, comma, PMT, comma, the present value, comma, 0. Then close parenthesis and enter. And so we got 350.92 pesos. And take note, for the present value, we cannot put it in a positive sign since it will result into a negative one. So you see what I mean. And for this example, I'm going to show you this rule. Percent 3, 1, negative 100, and just type in 0. So take note, we cannot drag all the cells at once because each of the values needs to be grouped according to its corresponding label. So as you can see, once we do this, FV parenthesis, and we drag all this at once. So once we drag from the cell E3 to E7, it will only be labeled as part of the rate, which is the first to come after the parenthesis. And as we press enter, it would result into putting too few arguments for this function, which is invalid. So please take note of that. Now let us proceed to the second formula, which is the FV schedule. The FV schedule financial function is an Excel difference function, and it is very important when you need to calculate the future value with the variable interest rates. So how does this work? We would type in the equal sign following FV schedule, then just open the parenthesis and we will see the principal and the schedule. The principal refers to the present value of the particular investment, while the schedule is the series of the interest rate being put together. And in the case of Excel, you will be using different boxes, then try to select the range. So let us have an example so you could understand further about this financial function. Let us say that Mr. Bean invested around $150 at the end of 2017. So let's put there. And it is expected that the interest rate will change every year. So in the year 2018, 2019, 2020, the interest rate would later be around 7%, 9%, 8%, respectively. So now, what would be the FV in 2020 and how do we divide the whole thing? First, let us group each of these. We have the principal, which is $150. Next, we have the year 2018 that has 7% interest rate. 2019 with 8% interest rate. And 2020 at 9% interest rate. So now, how do we calculate the FV schedule? We would type in the equal sign. Following the FV schedule, open parenthesis, then we would drag the principal value, which is $150, and press comma. Then we would drag all the cells from
E18 to E20.
Then close parenthesis, press enter, and we get $188.9406. And that would be our final answer for the FV schedule function. So take note, we cannot put a dollar sign specifically beside the value for the principal, since this may result in an invalid argument for the function. While I was mentioning the dollar sign, I was just referring so that we won't get confused whether is it a peso or a dollar. So once you put a dollar sign, look, so it gets value. And that means the cell or the function becomes invalid. So please take note of that. Now let us proceed to the next formula, which is the present value. So once you already know how to calculate the value for the FV or the future value, it will be much easier for you to find the value for the PV or the present value. Well, how does it work? So first, let us type in the equal sign, followed by PV, open parenthesis. Then we will see the rate, NPER, PMT, FV, and type. So again, the rate basically refers to the interest rate or the period. The NPER is the number of periods. The PMT is the payment period. The FV is the future value. And lastly, the type is basically when the payment is made. And if nothing is mentioned, then it is assumed that the payment has already been made at the end of the period. So let us have an example for you to have a wider idea about this. So let us say that the future value of the investment that you are going to make is 150 in the year 2019. And the interest rate that you are expecting to receive would be at 20%. Now, let us type in the equal sign, following the PV, open parenthesis. Then we would drag in the same values for the rate, NPER, PMT, PV, and the type from the FV function from this given. Since we still have the same values numerically or the numbers, but what's being changed is the label for the value 150. For the FV function, we have 150 as the present value. While today we have the present value function, we have our FV, our 150 as the future value function. So let us now start dragging each of the values, same order as before. So we have the rate, 20%, comma, NPER, comma, PMT, comma, the FV, we'll consider it as FV, comma, and then the 0, then close parenthesis, and we press enter. So we get 51.31 pesos. Same goes for this one here in the PV function. Let us say that our FV is at 100. and the interest rate would be the same at 10%. Let us type in equal sign, PV, open parenthesis. So we have the rate at 10%, comma, NPR, comma, PMT is 1, comma, the PV, which we'll consider as FV for the present value function, that is negative 100 still, and then the 0 for the type, close parenthesis, then enter. So we get 72.64 pesos. Now let us proceed to the fourth formula, which is the net present value or the NPV function. The net present value basically refers to the sum total of the positive and the negative cash flows over the years. Similar to the rest, we can represent this financial function by typing in the equal sign, following the NPV, open parenthesis, then we will see the rate, value 1, value 2, and so on. The rate basically refers to the discount rate of a period, while the value 1, value 2, and so on basically refers to the negative and positive cash flows, wherein the negative values would be considered as the payments, while the positive values would be considered as the inflows. So let me give you an example to help you further understand this financial function. Let us say that the interest rate is at 5%. The initial investment would be at 1,500, and the return from this would be 400, 500, 500, 400. Okay. And let us say that these values are the different cash flows coming from the initial investment up to the last return. So now that we have the given, we can start applying the NPV formula. Let us type in the equal sign following NPV, open parenthesis, then we would drag in the value of the rate, which is 5%, comma, drag all the cash flows starting from the initial investment up to the last return, which is from the cell D41 up to the cell D45, close parenthesis, then we press enter, and we would get 90.92 pesos. Now, let us proceed to the fifth formula, which is the XNPV function. This financial function is very much like the NPV function, but with a small twist. We can represent the XNPV function just like the previous ones that we have encountered. As usual, we would start off with the equal sign, following the XNPV, open parenthesis, and we will see the rate, the values, and dates. The rate basically refers to the discount rate of a period. The values refer to the positive or negative cash flows, which are also known as the array of values, while the date basically refers to the specific date of an array or a value. So now let us have an example to help you widen your understanding about this last function that we'll be discussing for this session. So now, we will be using the same example as the NPV function, but we will be adding random dates for each value starting from the initial investment up to the last return. So let us say that the initial investment was made during the 9th of September, the year 2019. For the first return, let us say it was made at the 9th of September, 2020. The second return at 2021, 2022, and the last return would be at 2023. So there we go. So we already have our given ready. Let us now type in the equal sign and start applying the formula for the x and PV function. So equal sign, following the x and PV, open parenthesis, then we would drag in the value of the rate, which is 5%, comma. Next would be for the values, wherein we drag and include the initial investment, which is 1,500, and the returns at 400, 500, 500, 400. So just drag all of this, then comma. And lastly, for the dates, we will drag the given dates based from our example, starting from the initial investment up to the last return. So just press this and then drag all of this date. Then close parenthesis, and then we press enter. And then we got 95.25 pesos as our final answer. And that's all for today's session. I hope you have learned something from this tutorial. See you next time.